تخسر الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والهب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان وله الجوار الأنشاءة في البحر للأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يسأله من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في شأن فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان سنفرغ لكم أيها الثقلان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يرسل عليكما شواظ من نار ونحاس فلا تنتصران فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فإذا انشقت السماء فكانت وردة كالدهان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان فيومئذ لا يسأل عن ذنبه إنس ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صلوات.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Hadi. One more loud salawat for him. I'd like to now invite Brother Mehdi for recitation of Quran with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والليل إذا يغشاها والسماء وما بناها والأرض وما طحاها ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها كذبت ثمود بطغواها إذ انبعث أشقاها فقال لهم رسول الله ناقة الله وسقياها فكذبوه فعقروها فدمدم عليهم ربهم بذنبهم فسواها ولا يخاف عقباها. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Mehdi. One more loud salawat. Before I invite the respected scholar for his speech tonight, I would like to remind everyone that in-person attendance here at CFK is mandatory with mask due to the rising COVID cases and our community members being affected. If you do not have a mask, one will be provided for you. At this time, I'd like to request Sayyid to ascend the member and honor the Mu'mineen Mu'minat with his speech tonight with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
maybe a little closer. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Sure. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I believe we can begin as we did yesterday with brief questions. I don't know if we have any questions remaining from yesterday. If so, then we can start with those, and then we can continue with any new questions that you may have for today. So, any questions? I think, sisters, there was a question from. Did you want to ask that now, or? Sure. To a non-Muslim or for ourselves? Specifically, the Islamic not banning of slavery and the laws of slavery. Okay. So the question is, how can we understand or how can we justify the Islamic and Quranic laws with regard to slavery? So one of the key elements in that is to know that society changes, and it becomes very difficult for us to imagine both what life was like and what relative priorities would have been like in a different time. Because most of us cannot conceive of a subsistence level of economy where starvation is an actual relevant factor in our planning. It's hard for us to imagine what moral choices might be like in a society where starvation is a real possibility. And some things that we might say, I would never do that, or I would never consider that moral, it might be very different if, we actually had to choose which of my children would survive or would not survive. That's true on an individual level. Like I might say, I would never sell one of my children into slavery. I would never sell one of my children into slavery. But if I had 5 children and only 2 of them are going to survive if they stay with me, I don't know what I would do, because I've never really been able to understand that type of an emergency. I might hypothetically think, well, I would do this, or I would make something work, or, but not being in that situation, I'm not qualified to say on an individual level. The same thing applies on a collective level. But on a collective level, it's even more difficult for us to imagine. What do I mean by a collective level? On an individual level, it's simply a question, what would you do if your kids are either going to die with you or live a very hard life, say enslaved, by somebody else? It's a hypothetical thing that is impossible for me to imagine. I'm thankful that I would never have to make that decision, but not really sure what I would do if I did. But imagine now if you have a society where there's no such thing as international law, an entire international system, where you have civilizations that have empires and international relations, but where every empire thinks, I should be the king of the earth, and I should expand my territory, which was how the world was, largely until the Treaty of Westphalia in Europe and until modern times in the rest of the world. And you had some places that were barbarian tribes. Barbarian in the sense that they didn't really have any kind of conception of reciprocal law or relations. What is the best system? And because we can't imagine even the individual decision, we certainly can't imagine the collective decision. What I want us to get to is to shift. Most modern people think that slavery is inherently immoral, and therefore I can judge a religion that hasn't banned slavery. I want to move away from that to a position of humility, which is, you know what? I can't know what would be moral in a different time, in a different context. And therefore, if a religion, especially in pre-modern times, allowed slavery, it's not that I can judge it as being wrong. Islam should have done this or Islam could have done this. But rather I say, you know what, this is not a factor. I can't understand it or support it necessarily, but I can't critique it because there are factors beyond my control. And I think that's a more fair and accurate position with regard to slavery. It's different than saying, for example, women are, say, half as human as men, or one race is half as human as another race. That's something that we as human beings and people back then could judge. Now, how do I make a difference? How do I say that, well, slavery we can't make a judgment on, but say valuing every human soul equally regardless of gender, regardless of race, we can make a judgment on? That's based on a general principle, which is that people were just as moral back then as they are today. That's a default. And if that's the case, and it is the case, then if something seems to be right to me and my conscience today, but the majority, the vast majority of moral people at one other time did not agree, then that's probably not a universal. It's probably due to certain circumstances in my time. So today there are certain human rights that people believe very strongly and they think are very important, but that people 100 years ago or 200 years ago may not have seen in the same way. Now maybe we're right and they were wrong. Maybe we're wrong and they were right. Maybe they were right in their context and we're right in our context, but when there's a difference, it's hard to say, well, we are universally more moral and therefore our judgment is right for their time as well. So the idea that men and women are equally human is an argument that if we read the Quran and see how Islam spread, and if we look at other religious teachings, whether Buddhism or other teachings in other societies and other cultures, that resonated with moral and conscientious people even 1,000 years ago, even 2,000 years ago. So the idea that men are not more human than women, one race is not more human than another race, that we can say is a universal moral principle because whenever it was preached, whenever it was part of a religious teaching, it resonated with people. So it must have appealed to some part of the human fitrah and the human conscience, regardless of circumstance. A lot of people who grew up in a racist society, a racialist society or a racist society, or a sexist society may not have thought that. But when their conscience was struck with that teaching, they couldn't really resist it either on a moral level. It won out. But notice the abolition of slavery did not work that way. Even when slaves like Spartacus in Rome revolted, they didn't revolt to abolish slavery. They often then held slaves themselves. Something was different about society and about social relations, and something was different about the relative merits in the collective that differentiated between certain forms of justice which we understand and people then understood, and the abolition of slavery. Does that make sense? So if we believe that people in all times are universally moral, and they have a conscience, and a human conscience is not purely a cultural or a social response, but there is a real human conscience, then the fact that most pre-modern people did not think of an abolition of slavery as necessarily a solution itself tells us something. That there are certain economic, social, and political factors that have caused us to see slavery in the way that it is. Short answer, when people object to it, generally speaking, they have certain assumptions, which is that our morality is universal, meaning our application of moral principles is not culture specific or context specific, but this is universal, and therefore we can judge, for example, did Islam allow polygamy, or did Christianity or Judaism or another religion allow something on our modern terms. That's not fair. There are certain judgments that are universal. So a religion that allowed human sacrifice is wrong, regardless of time or place. And there are other decisions or other judgments that are not universal. And that is what slavery is. And how can you differentiate between the two? Well, does that judgment resonate with people of conscience across time and place? If it does, it's probably universal. If it doesn't, then at least be humble and recognize that it's not universal. Islam does, however, put in place a logic that reduces and eventually would move towards the abolition of slavery. So in Surah Al-Balad, فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَ فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ. The Quran does say that one of the moral challenges and difficult challenges that a believer should be thinking about and prioritizing is to free slaves. Not a Muslim slave, not a worthy slave, but any slave, even a mushrik, even an unbeliever. So that sets an ideal that freedom is preferable. Islam limited the ways that people can become slaves, and from a Shi'i Muslim perspective, if the imams had authority and society was not governed by a faulty system, then most of the avenues by which slaves continued to enter into the economy and into society would have been closed off, because the imams, they taught that war is not our primary response to civilizations and societies outside of Muslim borders, but we look towards treaty relations and establishing understanding and peace, as the Prophet did with Hudaybiyah, as Imam Ali did with the caliphs of his time, as Imam Hassan did with Muawiyah, and so on. Right? So in modern times, as a Muslim, I personally believe that if the Ahlul Bayt had the option to openly preach, they would have gradually marginalized slavery as society and as international relations allowed it. I can't speak for the Ma'sumin. I can only conjecture based on what I know of their teachings and the history and the way that they limited slavery. And we do have a hadith to that effect. But what I can say for sure is that the permission of slavery or not permission of slavery is not something that I can judge Islam by any more than it allows me to condemn all of pre-modern people. Because most pre-modern people, including slaves, who fought against their own slavery, did not actually believe in an absolute abolition of slavery. Right? And then there's other more detailed examples that we can give that I won't do in the interest of time. I believe that that answer is actually sufficient because it mentions the key point, which is that in general, there is there is a subconscious arrogance to thinking that our politics, our culture, our economics applies in all times and places, and especially in pre-modern society. That is a result of ignorance, and the proper response is humility. People do not want to be humbled because they say, well, then what can I use to judge? What if a religion said human sacrifice? What if a religion said, that, like, say, Mormonism did until late 20th century, that blacks cannot enter into, any kind of formal religious role. How can I judge that badly? Well, you can judge that badly because you can see, even in pre-modern times and across different societies, that message did not harmonize with people of conscience. And so we can distinguish between universal morality, that is the standard by which we can appreciate true teachings of religion, with circumstantial and context-specific judgments that really only apply within their context and don't apply universally. By the way, that same answer applies to polygamy and many other questions people have about, say, well, how can we say that Islam is moral or the Prophet was moral, even though some of his decisions would not seem moral to us in modern times? Because presumably if the Prophet were alive today, he would also make certain decisions differently because he would be responding to our culture and our context. Any questions about that? Does that not answer any parts of the underlying issue, or does that sufficiently address the question of slavery and why would Islam allow slavery? Anybody who had that question want to ask a follow-up? It's a very important question. It's not just about slavery. That's like an extreme case. But a lot of things about the way the Prophet did things or the way the Quran taught things seem to be out of touch with what we consider to be the right decision. And that's a fair point. And if a Muslim today lived according to those standards, they might not have a very successful marriage or a very successful time raising their children and convincing their children to be Muslims. Islam wants us to be aware of our culture, our time, our context, our needs. The Imams themselves did that. Famous example, Imam Ja'far Sadiq did not dress the way Imam Ali alayhi salam dressed. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Right? So there was a different culture and a different context even between Imam Ja'far Sadiq and Imam Ali. Right? Less than 150 years. So certainly you have to be aware of what brings you that effect which Islam wants us to have in your time. But that doesn't mean that everything is relative and everything changes, and hijab today should just be kind of dress a little bit modestly but doesn't have to follow the law. And salat should just be do a dua and remember God. No, there are absolutes and there are variable teachings. And we do have a way to understand what are absolutes and what are variable teachings, partially by what Islam has said is wajib and what Islam has said is not wajib, partially by what is a universal moral response that translates across societies and across times, and what is a particular moral response that resonates in one context but is not necessarily understood or does not resonate in a different context. So I think that principle helps us understand a lot about the value of Islamic teachings and how we can approach a heritage that does not always resonate with our current circumstances. So let's maybe have one or two more questions and then we can continue with the majlis. It doesn't have to be related to slavery. If there is a follow-up, great. If not, you can ask a question on another topic as well. Any other questions? Sisters, any questions? Sure. That men are the head of household. So some Islamic laws can be abused. For example, if we say that men are the head of household, that can be abused to, say, become a dictator or something like that. And how do we understand that? That's also a detailed question. Somewhat briefly, Islamic laws are not meant to set an ideal in all cases. In some cases, they are meant to be an aspiration. In other cases, they are meant to be a floor. In other cases, they are meant to preserve some continuity from one generation to another. In other cases, they are meant to prevent disputes from escalating, for example, or to reinforce a certain value system. So, for example, the Islamic laws of inheritance are very constricted. They're not as flexible as people would sometimes like, where today you can kind of will your stuff to anyone you want, related or unrelated, or even to your pet rather than to your kids. And so there is an inflexibility, and it doesn't always meet who needs the most or deserves the most in terms of their character, or if one child has health concerns, another child has a very high-paying job, and so on. So the purposes of Islamic law sometimes are to affirm certain values. In Islamic inheritance law, one of those values is that the closest relationship deserves the greatest share of a deceased person's estate. They may not be the best mu'min, they may not be the most poor or the most deserving, but the closeness of the relationship gives the greatest share of the estate, because Islam wants that closeness to translate to preserving the legacy and the estate, and hopefully most closely sharing the values of whoever deceased. So Islam's law is sometimes creating a culture, sometimes preserving certain values and putting them, enshrining them in law. Sometimes like a safety net to prevent things from breaking apart when they're not going well. A lot of the laws in marriage are like that. They're a safety net that if things are not working out, the wife can say, hey, by the way, this is not my responsibility. The husband can say, hey, by the way, this is not my responsibility. They're not meant to be an ideal. In other words, if the wife ever says to the husband, or needs to say, that this is not my responsibility, or if the husband ever says to the wife, or needs to say to the wife, by the way, this is not my responsibility, I'm not liable for this, then that is a sign that you've fallen off of the path, and now you're up against the guardrails, and you're driving dangerously close to the precipice. You might fall off. The law is not an ideal, and it is basically that if things are not going well, at least you have a sense that, all right, this is the minimum that I need to do, that's the minimum that I deserve to receive in order to hopefully keep the relationship somewhat alive, where something else is going to have to intervene to revive it. So what is the solution? Islamic law has certain restrictions and certain flexibilities. because of those other goals that it has. We as societies need to collectively see where are those forms of abuse that exist. And sometimes within the law, we can use the flexibility in the law to reduce that abuse. Sometimes we need to have non-legal means of reducing that abuse. In the case of marriage, Islam allows conditions to be put by husband and wife. And so, we have standard conditions that can be put in, individual conditions that can be put in. That's a legal means to reduce the likelihood of a disagreement in the future. Another way is to establish non-legal means of reinforcement and support as a community to help newly married people, provide therapy, counseling, maybe an annual retreat for new families to kind of throw ideas off of each other and sound each other out. So a strong culture will often reduce the chance of abuse. There's no way that you can define a law that preserves all of the things that law needs to preserve, but also eliminates the possibility of abuse. That is accomplished by two ways. One is using the flexibility of the law to prepare and predict. And second, using culture and community initiatives and institutions to pad our life so we're not resorting to the law. Think of it like a business partnership. If you have to refer to your company bylaws for every decision in your business, that partnership is not going well, right? You need to have a mutual understanding, and that is partially by revisiting what the understanding and the requirements are, but partially by establishing good practices, which are not written in law, but they are those community cultural institutions that prevent you from having to need the law at all times. So in a healthy society, I think that the potential for abuse and the reality of abuse is there, but I don't think it's more than exists without that law. If you actually look at it, yes, there are cases that are unfortunate within our community. But a lot of marriages break apart for very similar reasons or comparable reasons outside of our community, where people don't have that Islamic law. But when it happens to a Muslim, it's often, because of Islam, because of misogyny, because they'll attribute it to the Islam part, not to those broader social or personal factors. So the reality is there, but I think that it's usually a result of broader processes. And if you actually compare the frequency, I think that our community is equal or better than people who don't have that burden of law, but have equal or worse forms of abuse. It shows up in a different form that doesn't give the blame to religion, but it ends up being the same outcome. So to conclude, whether in marriage or elsewhere, to get your aspirations, look towards the examples we have from Ahlul Bayt, not the laws that we have within Islamic law. If you want to have a good marriage, then you want to read about how Imam Ali and Lady Fatima talked to each other, how the Prophet and Lady Khadija talked to each other, how did Ahlul Bayt deal with each other and accommodate each other, and not what are my rights, what are your rights. And the strongest prenuptial agreement is not going to save you, but a stronger focus on trying to live up to the ideals given to us by Ahlul Bayt will do a lot. That's the padding and the cushioning that's going to prevent us from having the worst outcomes. Now, people change, People change for the better and people change for the worse. Society cannot be predicted. Don't be afraid of that. Sometimes things don't work out. You have to deal with unexpected problems, health problems, physical problems, personality problems, economic problems. A lot of people put off marriage or are always on the defensive because I need to protect myself because they're afraid of and they want to avoid those things. That's life. And if it's not one test, it's another test. If it's not my spouse that's going to get on my nerves, it's going to be my parent or my child. Allah's going to give us relationships that are going to test us. And so if we have that trust that, God, you have a plan, I'm going to do my due diligence, I'm going to do things the best that I can, but I know that I'm going to have a difficult relationship somewhere. It might be my mother or it might be my mother-in-law. It might be my spouse or it might be my child. But I need to get through how to deal with difficult relationships. It might as well be this one and not that one. A little bit of reliance on Allah gives us a lot more confidence so that we don't always try to find, is Islamic law to blame, is this to blame, is that to blame, but we kind of deal with it and we move past it and we grow in the process. And that's an important part of living a life of a believer. Recognize that those difficulties are part of life. They are opportunities for us to achieve growth, and don't be so concerned about, eliminating any possibility that anybody can take advantage of you. The only way that you can eliminate any possibility of anybody taking advantage of you is not to ever go out on a limb for anybody. Not to go out on a limb in marriage, not to go out on a limb in friendships, to always kind of approach things from a legalistic and a very defensive perspective. You won't get taken advantage of, but you're not going to have spiritual growth. And you're not going to have a good life by doing that. So get taken advantage of occasionally. Be responsible, do your due diligence, consult a lawyer when you need to, before making a major investment or giving somebody a big loan. But then recognize that part of life and part of having intimate relationships is doing a trust fall. And then picking yourself up when the person is not there for you. And if you do that, then Allah will be there for you. And we have also those examples from our Prophet and from our Imams. And Allah does take care of those things. All right. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So just once again, we want to begin the matam at what time? Just for my own reference? 7:45 or so? All right. 40. Inshallah. Once again, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله في القرآن المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الذين آمنوا والذين هاجروا وجاهدوا في سبيل الله أولئك يرجون رحمة الله والله غفور رحيم صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. As we mentioned yesterday, Allah says in the Quran that there are 3 attributes that define those people who have hope in the mercy of God. And I will very much abbreviate the majlis today. I think the questions that we had before the majlis were comprehensive and difficult questions. Each of them could take much more time, but they are fundamental. And they are important obstacles to belief for many people. And so hopefully those answers give us a little bit of food for thought. They will certainly not be enough. Continue to think and continue to ask so that we can put our trust in Islam as a source of moral guidance and inspiration. If I think that Islam is backwards, God forbid, or it's outdated, then I will not be able to read the Quran for moral inspiration. So that question is a very important question for us to resolve So subconsciously, I can put my trust in the Quran. I'm motivated to read and derive guidance from the Quran because I understand how it's not outdated, even if certain laws don't fit my society and my context. And the same thing applies with the Islamic principles of marriage. The fundamental guidance in the Quran is an ideal for us to aspire to. The laws are not always ideals. Sometimes they fill other purposes. As we began talking yesterday, there are three main criterias for hope. And the first of those is Iman. How do we normally translate Iman? Normally we translate Iman as belief. The problem with belief is that it is involuntary. If I tell you something that's really exciting and attractive, but it's not credible, you might want to believe me, but you can't, because you don't control what you believe. It's not up to you. Example I've given in the past is if I hold up a glass of water and I say, if you drink this water, you're never going to get sick and you're never going to die. Which of us wouldn't like to have the elixir of eternal life? But no matter how much you may want to believe me, you're not going to believe me. Why? Because you know that I'm wrong. Maybe I think I'm right, but you know that whether I'm honest or I'm joking, I'm not right. Belief is a passive response based on what you know. So belief is not a good translation for Iman, because Iman is not passive. Iman is a decision. It's an action. In general, we think of actions as what we do. But in Islam, your most important actions are not what you do with your limbs, but what you do with your heart. So a lot of people, we spend our mind thinking about, curious about, imagining, maybe even fantasizing about things that are not good for us, maybe even things that are haram. But if we don't physically say or do something, we think we are okay. But if I think about something, imagine it, entertain the idea in my mind, worse, if I fantasize about it, it's going to affect who I am. That decision of my mind, that when the thought enters my mind, I'm not going to say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Get it as far away from me as I can. But rather I'm going to say, how would it be? What would it be like if I won the lottery and I was able to buy whatever I wanted? That curiosity is a decision. And in many ways, it is going to open the door to other sins. And then when the choice comes for what to say or what to do, I might not really have that much control. When peer pressure comes, I might not be able to stop myself. I might feel like it's not my fault, I couldn't help it. But it is my fault and I am morally responsible. Why? Because I could have never allowed myself to think about it and become desensitized to it. By the stories I read, by the shows that I watch, by the thoughts that I entertain, the media that I consume, and most importantly, the ideas that I let enter into my mind. Your most important actions are not your actions with your tongue, or your hands, or your feet. Your most important actions are the decisions that you make with your heart. But they are actions, choices, and you have control over them. And so Iman should be understood and defined in that active sense of a decision to put your trust in something, not as a passive response to believe something or not. So sometimes we can translate it as believers. You know, mu'min is a believer, Iman is belief, but remember that it is active and not passive. It is a decision. And therefore you control it and you are responsible for it. And so perhaps a better translation is faith and faithfulness. Not blind faith, as Christians sometimes say, but reasonable faith. rooted in knowledge. Our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wa says that Iman is ma'rifatun bil qalb, knowledge with the heart. So you rooted in knowledge, and then iqrarun bil lisan, amalun bil arkan. You say it and you do it, so it comes from the inside and it shows itself on the outside. The first requirement is Iman. And Iman is a requirement for a person to have hope, because that sets the compass of your life. What is important to you? And we have to change the way that we use language and the way that we consume cultural elements in our society in order to always keep our compass and our priority facing God. Right now, if I ask most of you of a professional age, how much are you worth? What do you think of? Income? Investments? Life insurance? How much are you worth? I'm not saying let's be materialistic. You're believers, I'm believers, or you're faithful, I'm a faithful person, but just the language, successful. Do you work? If you spend your entire life studying, volunteering, helping, contributing, do you work? No, I'm a stay-at-home dad, or I'm a stay-at-home mom. I don't work. That's not work. Is it work in reality? Yes. But it's seen as different and also as valued less. Right? It's as if you throw away your life. But how many people on their deathbed do you think say, you know what? I spent so much time raising a family, I wish I had spent more hours in the office. And how many people say, you know what? I spent so much time in the office, I wish I had spent more time with my loved ones. That's in this world. And if you go to the hereafter, even those few people who might say, you know, I wish I spent more time in the office, they will probably say, you know what, I wish I spent more time with my family, raising my family, helping my family. Work is what you are doing to build a spiritual legacy, to build connections and relationships to honor God. Your career is just something that you do to make that work possible. That's not your work, that's your side hustle. Your work is what you're doing to build your legacy. That applies equally to men and women. But our language does not really allow for that framework to enter into our subconscious. This is how we use the language. How much are you worth? According to a hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, خير مال المرء وذخائره الصدقة. Your savings, your mal, your dhakhair, zakhira, your savings, your net worth is your sadaqah that you've spent. What you've kept is what you don't have, and you won't have the moment you die. I don't know when I'm going to die. But what I've spent in the way of Allah, of my money or my time, that's my savings. So when I say, or somebody says to me, what's your net worth? What should enter into my mind? What did I give to God? What did I give? Not my khums. Right? Sometimes people say, I gave so much in khums, I'm burned out. That's not even mine. Right? Khums is kind of like if you come into my house and you leave your wallet in my sofa. And then you call me and you say, can you return my wallet? And I'm like, sure. And I find it and I look inside and there's like $10,000 in your wallet. I'm like, oh my God, I paid so much. I'm burned out. I can't give charity. I just gave this person $10,000. I gave you $10,000. It wasn't my money, right? That was a debt that I owed you and I paid it back. So what you give in khums is not a donation. If you get the tax deduction, great. You know, more power to you. Don't choose to give khums to a place that's going to give you a tax deduction if it's not the best place to give it, though. When you're repaying a debt, you repay the debt in the best way that you can repay it. If you can send the money for free and not have to pay a money transfer fee or a wire transfer fee, great. But if you have to pay the wire transfer fee in order to pay the debt, then you pay it, right? Because it's a debt. I'm not giving it at all. I'm just returning it to its rightful owner. Same thing applies with zakat. Same thing applies with fitrah. Your dhakhira is what you choose to give, monetarily, or in terms of your time, or in terms of your sincerity and your advice, whatever you can give in the way of Allah. So when somebody says to me, what is your net worth? I have to think, you know what, last week, I only did my wajib prayers. And even then, I kind of rushed through them, and I didn't really do much else of studying Islam or volunteering for the sake of Allah or contributing financially. You know what, I might have put $1,000 into my investments, but I didn't put anything in my spiritual account. My net worth has gone down. And all I've got to show for it is that my savings in financial terms have gone up. We have to rework even the way we use language, because it affects our subconscious. It affects the way that our communities work. So Iman is an orientation towards God that shows up in our actions. Now, a very common problem that we have in our societies is that because people want to be oriented towards God, they say that I don't want to get involved in the rat race. Careerism is a waste. I don't want to get to the top of my field. I just want to be able to, earn enough to get what I need and spend all my time in things that I enjoy. The fact that our orientation is towards God does not mean that we don't make use of the resources and the means that God has created within this world for us to approach Him. If I believe that God is Ash-Shafi, the one who cures, does that mean that I say, you know what, I'm not going to get into this rat race of ever getting treatment for my sickness? If I have, God forbid, a loved one choking, I'm not going to call 911. I'm just going to go to the namaz room and say, I hope that I get the right dua and they get saved. Right? I would be criminally negligent if I said I'm going to go to the prayer room and just do dua rather than call 911. It's not a lack of faith. It is faith. Because God is the one who told us that use the material means that I have created to seek my cure. And when you give the medicine or you give the treatment or you seek the best solution, that is your faith in God. And if you don't do that, then you are rejecting God. So if I'm, by the Grand Canyon and I say I'm just going to walk off the edge, maybe I can fly. That's not trust in God, that is rejecting God. Because God created the physical laws of the universe, one of which is gravity, which tells us that if you walk off of a cliff, you're going to fall to your death, or at least severe injury. Faith in God is recognizing the laws that God has created in the world and respecting them and utilizing them. And one of our goals as believers should be that if there is a resource that God has created that allows us to do good, I should want that resource to be in the hand of a believer who will use it in accordance with the commandment of God rather than an unbeliever. So if I have a shot at getting a position of leadership in my company or in my job, and therefore using that position of influence and power and financial wealth in accordance with God's command, rather than throwing dark money towards some underhanded campaign to subvert society's best interests, using it to help society and uplift society, if I turn my back on that opportunity and say I don't have that kind of ambition or aspiration, then I am being ungrateful to the opportunity that God has given me. And if an unbeliever then acquires that position that I could have had, acquires that wealth that I could have had, acquires that influence that I could have had, and uses it to evil because I could not be bothered to do something a little bit difficult and sacrifice a few years of my time to get a more influential position in society, then I bear some of the moral responsibility for the evil that person is going to do. To use an extreme example, if there is a weapon lying on the ground and I know that there are people around who want to commit crimes with it, if I don't take that weapon and turn it away so that it's not going to be used wrongly, and somebody takes it and then commits a crime, I bear some moral responsibility for the crime committed by with that weapon. Because I could have picked it up and I could have taken it somewhere where it would not have caused that harm. So when we say that your orientation is towards God, your net worth is what you do for God, that includes what you do by acquiring wealth, power, and influence within the society, because our ideal is that the resources of this world should be in the hands of the believers, so they use it not for their own whim and their own bling, but they use it for the uplifting of society materially and spiritually. That is Iman. The second attribute is Hijrah. Hijrah means that you migrate. And what it means is that you spiritually migrate to a place where you can practice your faith. That requires a physical migration sometimes. It might mean that you move from one country to another. It might mean that you move from one city to another. Or it might mean that you move from one neighborhood within a city to another. It might mean that you find a less desirable house in close proximity to a masjid rather than your dream house that's so far away from family and from community and from masjid that you can only come occasionally, or you can only come virtually. Hijrah is an emotional and spiritual migration to ensure that you are going to put yourself in an environment where you can strengthen and practice your faith. And some people think of hijrah only as I have to go to a Muslim country, some extreme example that's impractical for whatever number of reasons, so that they can ignore it and say that, well, because I can't do that, so I'm just going to live in my own island where I'm disconnected from my family, I'm disconnected from my community, I can only come to the masjid every week once, or maybe every month once, and beyond that, I don't have a responsibility. The second attribute, if you want to have hope in God, you have to put yourself close to an environment that strengthens your faith in God, and that is hijrah. Start from the heart, and then it shows itself in physically moving yourself away from an environment that weakens your faith. My hijrah might simply be that on campus I'm not going to hang around with the friends that I had from childhood, because they've chosen an irreligious path and they are not going to help me maintain my faith. I am going to choose another circle of friends and an environment that is wholesome and healthy. Now, if they're family members who are not religious, I still have to maintain a connection. But I have to maintain it in a way that's not going to compromise my own faith. Hijrah is the second essential component. If you want to be able to have hope in God and God's mercy, you need to migrate away from an environment that compromises your faith towards an environment that strengthens your faith. The opposite of hijrah is ta'arrub, which means that you go in an environment where you become desensitized. Anytime you find that you are becoming desensitized to evil, before I say that, you know what, I'm going to take off my hijab, I'm not feeling it anymore. You know what, I'm not going to pray, I'm not feeling it anymore. You know what, I'm not going to eat dhabiha, I'm not feeling it anymore. Before a person ever makes that decision that they're not feeling it anymore, there are 1,000 steps. There are warning signs. There are pangs of conscience that will come. And then maybe weeks later, months later, sometimes years later, I make that disastrous decision that I'm not going to practice anymore. Those are the stages of ta'arrub. And that is when hijrah is needed. Whenever you find that you are being desensitized to something that your conscience knows is wrong, come back and do hijrah to God. Physically, or maybe just emotionally and spiritually. And finally, وَجَاهَدُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. A lot of people, they don't do jihad. They want to be religious, but they want to do it on their own terms. My favorite example is an actual real example, but if it applies to you, I'm not talking about you, is a person who went to ziyarat with an elder relative. And the elder relative has a wheelchair, has health concerns, cannot go everywhere, especially when it's crowded. And so this person did not actually get a chance to go into the haram almost at all. And so said, next time I'm going to go for ziyarah alone. I didn't get to do my ziyarah. If you went for ziyarah to Imam Hussein, trust me, Imam Hussein can come just outside his haram and answer your prayer. And he's going to do that much more willingly if you're pulling your elderly mother or even aunt or just an elderly lady in your community on a wheelchair. Imam Hussein is going to come and answer your prayer first before that person who says, let me just do my ziyarah, and is feeling it right next to the zari. If Imam Hussein doesn't do that, then come back and object to me, because we all know the values that Ahlul Bayt have taught us. They didn't teach us those values then to turn around and not answer our needs and answer our salam according to a different logic than what they taught us. So see how sometimes even my worship can become an act of selfishness. I feel like I'm not fulfilled and I need to do something differently, thinking that I want to do it for God. But who am I actually doing it for? Because I want to have a feeling. And if I'm tired and a little bit frustrated and I didn't get to see the tears because I was distracted trying to make sure that we don't get jostled and we don't get our purse snatched from us or something like that, then I feel like this trip was not spent well. وَجَاهَدُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Your struggle is for God, not for yourself. You don't have a feeling? Tough. You don't get to spend the time in the haram? Tough. You don't get to do it the way you wanted? Tough. If your jihad was for yourself, then you have those demands. More power to you. But then don't fool yourself into thinking that you're doing it for the sake of God. And that feeling you get is a drug high. It's not faith. You could have got it by taking LSD. You could have gotten it by fooling yourself into a spiritual trance. The only outcome that is worthy of a believer is a one that is given by God and not demanded by us when we serve God. 3 attributes. And we are out of time. Inna alladhina amanu, faith, orienting ourselves towards God. Walladhina hajaru, migration away from what desensitizes and distracts us towards God. Wajahadu fi sabilillah, struggle for God. Ulaika yarjuna rahmatallah. They will have hope in God's mercy. And I will just say a few words of musibah because inshallah we will have an opportunity for latmiya and continue our remembrance of Karbala. Yesterday we spoke about Imam Zainul Abidin, but there is another person who carried the message of Karbala and who carried the hope of the sacrifice of Karbala, and that is the sister of Imam Hussein, the heir of her mother, the second Fatima, Lady Zainab Salamullahi alayha. And on that journey to Karbala, she was the one who stood with Imam Hussein preparing for the tragedy that was to take place. And when the day of Ashura came, there were 2 people to whom Imam Hussein entrusted the message of Karbala. One was Imam Zainul Abidin, but the other was Lady Zainab. And so she shared in the sacrifice and the struggle of Imam Hussein. Lady Zainab was a woman who was so connected to the mission of Imam Hussein that even when her own sons were seeking to be martyrs, she didn't for a minute think that what will happen to me in old age? What will happen to my dreams that I had for Aun and Muhammad? She was only thinking that will it be possible to protect the life and the mission of Imam Hussein for a moment longer? It is such a beautiful irony. That when Ali Akbar asked Imam Hussein for permission to go to battle, the Imam did not hesitate and said, "Go, my son." But ask Lady Zainab because she loves you more than she loves her own children. And when Ali Akbar went to Lady Zainab, she said that, "Oh my son, how can I let you go? Because if you were to go to the battlefield, then I will not just lose a nephew. I will not just lose someone who is like a beloved son for me, but it is as if I will once again lose my grandfather because you remind me of the face and the features and the character of my grandfather, the messenger of God. Oh Ali Akbar, how can I let you go?" And then the same incident is repeated in reverse when Aun and Muhammad come to their uncle and say, "Oh, our uncle, do you give us permission to go to the battlefield?" And the Imam says that, "I cannot do so. Your father is not here. Your mother is old. You are too young to fight." And they said that our mother is the one who sent us here. And she is asking us, "Why are you still alive when everyone has given their life?" And then Lady Zainab herself came to her brother and said that, "Oh my brother, you have never refused a request from Zainab. Will today be, on the day of Ashura, the first time that you do not grant me my wish?" The Imam said that, "Oh my sister, whatever you may ask, it is yours. I will not hesitate." She said, "Give me the permission to offer my children as martyrs for your path." And now Imam Hussein had no choice. He readied Aun, and maybe Abu Fadl Abbas readied Muhammad. Whenever there was a battle that took place, Lady Zainab was there to stand with Imam Hussein. But when Aun and Muhammad fell in battle, Lady Zainab was nowhere to be seen. Imam Hussein and Hazrat Abbas, they went to the battlefield. They brought back the bodies of those two young martyrs. And as they approached the tent, both of them were looking towards where they would find their sister, and they were wondering, how would they bring these bodies to a mother? How would she be able to withstand the sight of the apple of her eyes? Two children martyred. But when they came, they saw that Lady Zainab was in a state of serenity, in prostration, turning towards Allah and saying that, "Oh Allah, I have gratitude that you have honored me and deemed me worthy of giving the two most precious things in my life in your path." And the prayer on the lips of Lady Zainab were that, "Oh Allah, if there is anything else that I can give to protect my brother, to save him from his enemies, to prevent him from having to suffer the martyrdom that is destined for him, then Zainab is ready to give it to honor and to protect her Imam and your appointed leader for humanity." Lady Zainab gave her all, and then she passed on that message of sacrifice. May we be loyal to the path of Lady Zainab and the path of Ahlul Bayt. Preserve their memory and carry on their spirit of sacrifice in our own lives. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
There was a moment with Sayyid Zainab alayhi salam, Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. There is a moment with Sayyid Zainab alayhi salam. I want you all to go to this moment. Lower your heads, bow your heads, close your eyes if necessary, and come with me together to the night of Wahsha. Some people translate Wahsha to loneliness, but in reality, it's more like a complete desolation, because Sayyida Zainab stands there on the plains of Karbala and there is no one in front of her. All the men are gone. Akbar is gone. Abu Fadl is gone. Al-Qasim is gone, and she stands there in front of the body of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. But she's confused. She's torn. Because she knows from one angle she must raise the flag and carry on the mission of Hussein. But from another angle, how can she leave behind the son of Fatima? How can she leave behind her brother with his garment taken from him, exposed beneath the sun, trampled under the hooves of Bani Umayyah? And this is where Zainab calls out in her pain. Her once hushed voice, it breaks the heart. She says, I cannot stay beside Hussein, and from Hussein I cannot part. She cries out, and her tears stream. Her veil yearns to wipe her tears. With everything that she's seen in one day, she stands aged 1,000 years. How do her pupils remain? Seeing moons ridden with spears, she edges ever closer. I ask, how does her soul not leave her, seeing there lying her butchered brother? What do her pupils lead to, with no soul and a crushed heart? She walks toward him. Her steps, they soften. Her hands, they clench. Her bones, they shake, and she trembles. She gasps for air with every step. Her lungs are tightened and brittle. Her mind grips her tongue, saying, what you see is beautiful. Do you see that flesh and bone? Naked and left all alone. Your beloved, everything that you've known. Every step brings her toward Hussein, and every step tears her apart. She says, how can I remain by him? How can I remain by him and by this sight be broken? How can my soul stand beside me and by Allah not be taken? How can I keep these girls here as they stand beside his body and they cry, Father, awaken? How can I remain and stand upon this tormenting sand when my brother's blood stained its land? I must begin my mission so that his revolt can begin. But how can I leave my beloved? How can I leave my beloved and without him carry on? When his soul left, it took with it mine, because Zainab and Hussein are one. How can I leave his body, butchered, naked, and alone? How can Zainab bint Ali ever again drink water freely when my brother was butchered thirsty? Even if I was taken captive from here, how can I depart? She says, I am the one who witnessed my brother left abandoned. I am the one who witnessed the veins of his neck opened, and I witnessed his body by Yazid's horses flattened. Tell me of someone who was slain, thirsty, alone, like Hussein. Skies of blood upon him rain. How much beauty I have found in a world of pain and hurt. Zainab calls out in her pain, and her once hushed voice that breaks the heart. She says, I cannot stay beside Hussein, and from Hussein I cannot part. I cannot stay beside Hussein, and from Hussein I cannot part. After she's taken, after the women are taken, that's when the true desolation began. Because there was not a single soul alive on the plains of Karbala. By the river were a pair of severed hands and a fallen flag, and a body trampled upon by the horses, an arrow left in his eye. Somewhere on the plains of Karbala is the turban of who? Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. But where is it found? Where do you see it? You see it on the small body of a young boy, Al-Qasim. Somewhere on the plains of Karbala is the last remnant, the last glimpse of Rasulullah himself. Only that is Akbar, severed upon the plains of Karbala. And somewhere on the plains of Karbala is the body of the son of the Prophet Muhammad, lying there on the dust, no longer resembling a man, but rather just flesh and bone. It's here that Bani Asad come toward the bodies. And they say, it's our turn now to try and bury these bodies. But they have a problem. What's the problem? They don't know which body belongs to which person, because of how much Bani Umayyah and the army of Umar and Sa'd mutilated these bodies. And if there were heads there, they wouldn't know which head belongs to which body. They're wondering what to do. And they see miraculously from the distance a man emerging. Imagine this image. A man emerging. Only his back is bent. He seems like he's young, but with the gray beard, the gray hairs on his beard, it's like he's 1,000 years old. Who is this man? Imam Zain al-Abidin. One by one, he helps them bury the bodies of the Ahlul Bayt. And I want you to imagine this pain upon the heart of Zain al-Abidin, who had to spend the whole of Ashura watching all of his family butchered, and now he must bury every single one by one. He must take these bodies and carry them upon his shoulders. What does he say? He says, how do I bury so many bodies? How do I bury so many bodies? Loved one after loved one my shoulders carry. Such sorrow my shoulders carry. He says, my steps, they become heavier with walking. And with every step, I find that decades I am aging. I left the day of death while still living, and I return to death, heeding my wailing. The bodies that I see that scatter this land were once men who for prayer beside me would stand. That cheek, I once kissed it, now it's one with the sands, and I once felt the warmth of those two severed hands. There is no life here, just flesh upon spears, and the blood-stained bone can't be washed away by tears. Loss of life, my shoulders carry. Death is left in the open for burial. Life ascended from them all when they fell. To say goodbye, my tongue isn't able, for the bones of my loved ones, the dust calls. Habib, my elder, his grey beard is bathed in blood. I lower my Zuhair into the mud. I kiss the cheek of John, just as Hussein would. He leaves me here to meet with my beloved. All of them are gone, leaving me here alone to bear such a weight that it bends my backbone. All alone, my shoulders carry. He says innocence was murdered upon that day. Innocence was murdered upon that day. Roses were crushed before taken away. Their juices bled, blood red, as swords would prey upon mothers' love for sons, turning hair grey. What man should have to bury a young boy? What man should have to bury a young boy? His arms they flail as my Qasim I carry. His grave is no bigger than a teen's would be. I'm sure, my beloved, it's filled with honey. You saw that death was sweeter than a bird's flutter. He asked you, are you sure? And you did not even stutter. My cousin, my shoulders carry. I then see a body that made me quiver. For a moment, I thought I was in Medina. Is that the body of Muhammad, my grandfather? Is that the body of Muhammad, my grandfather? Or is that the body of Ali al-Akbar? Am I in Najaf? For surely this is Ali, struck upon his head and taken too early. Oh Allah, protect me. Oh Allah, forgive me. How does an Ali anyone bury? An Ali buried and buried by Ali. Could this be Najaf? Surely it must be. An Ali, my shoulders carry. Left covered in dust, I turned toward where? I turned toward the Furat. Left covered in dust, I turned toward the Furat. But I saw blood all over me, on every part. I washed it all off before I depart. Why? I did not want to break my Uncle Abbas's heart. I did not want to break my Uncle Abbas's heart. I found his left hand, and then I searched for his right. I found his left hand, and then I searched for his right, feeling my heart with the angel of death fight. Oh Abbas, you once towered over us with your might, and here now you lie handless, met with your plight. Our love for you grew, if only you knew. I found your canteen, and I buried it with you. Abu Fadl, my shoulders carry. He then says, my eyes would have refused sight had they known that my beloved father like that to me would be shown. Tongue still dry from thirst, naked and alone, no longer Hussein, instead crushed flesh and bone. He says, my eyes would have refused sight had they known that my beloved father like this to me would be shown. His tongue still dry from thirst, left naked and alone, no longer Hussein, but instead crushed flesh and bone. As best as I can, I placed him into his crypt, and I tell him, my father, now you can finally rest. But I hear a voice scream from his severed neck. I hear a voice scream from his severed neck as he says, the baby, put the baby on my chest. He says, the baby, put the baby on my chest. And I say, but tell me, father, if I bring Asghar, your chest has been crushed, so how will he lay there? A baby, my shoulders carry. A baby, my shoulders carry. He says, how do I bury so many bodies? Loved one after loved one, my shoulders carry. Such sorrow, my shoulders carry. Such sorrow, my shoulders carry. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, salawat. Second louder salawat, please. And a third, loud to your voices. As we approach the days of Arba'een, it's a time that all of us wish that we were where? In the holy land of Karbala for the ziyarat of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and for the ziyarat al-Arba'een. And I pray inshallah that everyone here gets to go for Arba'een, not just this year, but next year and every year after that inshallah. And together will be the Zuwar of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, standing beside the grave of Imam Hussein. And for my last poem, it begins with a question I have, which is when Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam was taking the captives through to Sham and reassuring them and seeing how lonely they were, the loneliest the Ahlul Bayt possibly has ever been. No one beside them, all their men destroyed and gone and killed. Desolate, like I said, desolation. And everyone they meet, swearing at them, throwing rubbish at them, cursing their father Ali. I wonder if at that time, Sayyidah Zainab knew that one day, millions of people, millions of us, would come crying, Labbaika ya Hussein. Would come running to Karbala and saying, Labbaika ya Hussein, Labbaika ya Abbas, Labbaika ya Zainab, giving everything we have, of our money, of our time, whatever we have in our pockets, to Imam Hussein for the sake of Ziyarat al-Arba'in. Inshallah, we'll get to go for Ziyarat al-Arba'in. And I want you to imagine that Sayyidah Zainab is walking with the children of Ali Muhammad, and she is reassuring them that even though right now all you see is us in a line in chains being dragged across the plains of Iraq towards Sham, if only you could see what I see, which is there are millions of zuwar around us. There are mawakib all around us giving us water, giving us food. There are people reciting in our honor. There are people wanting to massage our feet. There are people saying, come and stay at our homes. You just can't see them. She says, don't cry, my girls. If only your eyes could see what I see. I see millions walking amongst us. Truly nothing but beauty. She says, don't weep, my beloveds. Save your tears and hush. Don't fear that the blue sky darkens. Minds open, eyes closed. Toward me, come close. Just like the shackles that tighten. Tightens our shadows. Tied hands have followed. To burnt tents, pay no attention. Tension is worldly. Endless is beauty. Let go and embrace the Lord's wisdom. I know the air tastes like death. And I know our clothes smell of ash, but we'll outlive both ash and death. Truly nothing but beauty. she says, will walk as captives, and yet will outlive both our captives and their castles. Our pain is finite, our name infinite. Millions shall lament our tale, muster the courage. There is a message that I must take toward the devil. What? Take all of our men, capture our women. Our truth is unequivocal. Our name cannot be erased. Praise God, because by God we are praised. Where are you and where are we? Truly nothing but beauty. She says, listen to me, girls. When your father fell, you could not see what my eyes saw. I saw that millions came running. I saw millions came running. Millions came running, anguished and screaming, waving their flags. I watched in awe. By the will of God, time has run backward. God broke its fundamental law, and toward our aid, servants Allah made. Into Karbala their souls pour. When they heard your small hearts break, they came here crying labbaik, reciting verses of poetry, truly nothing but beauty. So don't fear, my children. When we are taken, and the road we're on shall wear on, know that we're on a road where millions shall appear. A revolution we've begun, here it all begins. Know I see big inns of sleep and shelter. From this sun I see mawakibs, sweeter than our cribs, than as young children we slept in. Daughters, if you are hungry, know that of food there shall be plenty. Right now there isn't any, but it's truly nothing but beauty. She says, I wonder, I know. I wonder, I know, eyes wonder, tears flow, high upon the land a throne sits. Have you ever seen or heard of a scene where tears from the future drown it? Here's what its flow did. The earth it flooded, into two, good and evil are split. Beneath its evil, while above it sails, with its sails salvation ship. All those who cling to Hussein, or his message, just the same, shall know only victory. Truly nothing but beauty, so don't bewail too much. Don't bewail too much, not lost are as such the two hands of Abu Fadl. Don't bewail as much, not lost are as such the two hands of Abu Fadl, because I see him giving, he is living and giving those who in anguish his name call. Can the one who has no hands and yet out he hands granted wishes by the Lord's will? He raises his hands and an answer descends, just like a verse has been revealed. Though his hands may have been missing, he is bringing and bringing and bringing. Allah says be, and it shall be, truly nothing but beauty. Girls, when we return, know that it shall be written, that day is the 40th day. She says, girls, when we return, know it shall be written, that day is the 40th day. Maybe it may be, us girls and ladies, maybe millions shall make their way. Know that we'll make it, few will forsake it. So great that the heavens it outweighs. By him, drenched in dust, with millions behind us, rejoicing at our victory. My girls, do not fear nor dread, because millions shall tread where we've tread, and they'll tell the world our story. Truly nothing but beauty, so don't cry, my girls. Don't cry, my girls, if only your eyes could see what I see. I see millions walking among us, truly nothing but beauty. I see millions walking among us, truly nothing but beauty. Assalamu alaikum ya Aba Abdullah. والأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. Please stand for dua al-faraj. Sayyidina. Dua al-faraj. No, go ahead, please.
Martin.
Hussein, Ya 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 Hussein, Mawla Haq Imam Ya Hassan, Ya Hussein, Mawla Haq Imam Ya Hassan, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Wo Abide चलने से जो लाचार था محمد صلوات.
Brother, please take this.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
أشهد أن عليا ولي الله وأن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به. واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. ترجمة حضرات نامنا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعذائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة ورضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وعليه السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك، لا إله إلا أنت. أستغفرك وأتوب إليك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين.
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Just two quick announcements. First and foremost, our gracious and humble thank you to Sayyid Suleiman for being here for these 2 nights to bless us with his knowledge and his presence. Allow salawat for the safety of the Sayyid and his family. And of course, a thank you to our esteemed poet and guest tonight for the Latmiya. We are very honored to have heard you in person, and we hope you will visit CFK in the Dallas community soon. Allow salawat for Brother Nouri and the safety for his family as well. One announcement about a CFK update. We are excited to announce our very first CFK Business Management Internship Program. This paid internship is targeted for college students of any major who want to gain experience and learn how an organization works. This program can be eligible for college credit. More details to come inshallah, so keep an eye out for it on the CFK WhatsApp group as well as the website. And Also keep an eye out for program details for next weekend on our CFK WhatsApp group as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
For Salatul Isha, I will be praying 2 rak'ah. So those of you who are resident here, inshallah, will complete your prayer with 4 rak'at. Salatul Isha. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله وأن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأركع وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله الحليم الكريم. لا إله إلا الله العلي العظيم. سبحان الله رب السماوات السبع ورب الأرض السبع وما فيهن وما بينهن ورب العرش العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. يا الله يا الله يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مالك يوم الدين. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين. السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. السلام على علي بن الحسين زين العابدين. السلام على محمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين. السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام على موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام على علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد. السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي. السلام على الحسن بن علي الزكي العسكري. السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي، عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وظهوره، وجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.